So a couple of very critical conversations. First of all, I am very, very biased to these foods. Now, most of my job is I go to one person's house, I look at the fish and they're fine, and then I test the water. It's quite regularly terrible. Then I look at the food quality and they're sure enough good quality food. Then I'll often go to the very next house, all the fish are dying. I test the water. It's nowhere near as bad as the last house. I look at the food quality, sure enough, bad quality food. Most fish food is processed, pressure cooked crap. The food that I am very biased towards, number one, is New Life Spectrum's probiotics. Now, why I like the probiotics is, number one, it's got the best list of ingredients you've ever seen. Number two is it is cold extruded, so it is not pressure cooked and processed. You're actually getting the nutrients that are in it. And number three is it's got the probiotic bacteria in it. Now, the probiotic bacteria in it means that when the fish poo, the bacteria in the poo eats the poo. Now, I find that my tanks stay so much cleaner when I predominantly use this food. Now, my second favorite food, which I work with that one, is Danichi Color. Now, Danichi Color is a slow-cooked, holistic style food. It has a very, very good list of ingredients. And when it comes to pure natural color, I do not think you can beat that food. There are various artificial hormone foods and so forth that'll give you amazing color, but that's at the health risk of the fish. So this one here is my number one food. That'll be my everyday food. Then I've got my once or twice a week food. And then I also like to be looking at the fish. And these fish here are overweight. They need to be reduce the amount of food. But sometimes you find that some of the, for example, catfish may not be getting as much food because the other fish are eating it. So I do like the Algae Max, which is actually a complete food. It's advertised as an algae food, but it's got a lot of algae in it, but it's actually also a complete diet. And that's like a large pellet that can go to the bottom and give these guys a go. Because if you're going to reduce the amount of food, then you're going to reduce the amount of food going down to these guys. And if you find that they're getting thinner, then something like that is a supplement that I'd like. Now, the next really crucial thing to talk about is what is dissolved oxygen. Now, this tank here has fairly high surface tension. You can actually see the surface tension. So therefore, gas actually doesn't exchange where your surface tension's high. So it's got bubbles in it, and I would say the bubbles are passable, but over time the pumps do get old and they don't pump as much air in. So if it was up to me, I would have more oxygen going in this tank. The filter is flowing. I'll give the impeller a clean and see if I can get it flowing better. But even the filter is very stagnant. There's no visible flow going on. So it's all passable, but I think we could definitely improve. So if we get the dissolved oxygen level up, then what that does is raise the redox potential. And the redox potential is how fast the bacteria can work. Now, if the bacteria can work well, that'll help to keep the water clear. It'll help the amount of fish that we can have in the aquarium, and it will help the dissolved oxygen level as well. Because the more we raise our dissolved oxygen, the faster the bacteria can work, the more efficient the bacteria can be, therefore the less bacteria we need. Now, the other thing we just want to touch on as well is what's called biological capacity. Now, every single aquarium has got a biological capacity. And what I mean by biological capacity is, I mean, how many fish will Mother Nature let you have in this tank? And I'd like to suggest that this tank is at biological capacity. And what I mean by that is Mother Nature says this is exactly how many fish you can have. And then as the fish grow and as the fish breed, some have to die. So what will happen is the water will accumulate pheromones, phenols, and various things that will suppress the fish. And then some of the fish will actually have to die. And that's just the way that it actually goes. So I would, if this was my tank, thin out all the fish that I didn't feel I needed. And then I would replace them with much more colourful fish. And I would reduce the overall bio load. Otherwise, we are going to continue to lose the odd fish. And when we lose a fish due to biological capacity, this is what's going to happen. They'll sit at the top often or at the bottom. They'll gasp and then they'll slowly die off. And that just means that the pheromones and phenols are suppressing them. And that's pretty much how it goes. Don't worry about this water quality because the pH is almost neutral, which is way too low for this style of fish. The KH is basically 0. That can be a major problem, especially once it gets to 0, and the GH is really very high. So all of this is pointing to having too many fish, potentially fed on not good enough quality food, but we really want some really regular water changes, adding activated carbon and adding some polyfilter and giving better food is what I would want to do. Otherwise, over time, just as this little electric yellow up here is showing us he's in distress, we will get one fish after another. So the water quality is not good. I'm a very big fan of these things. These are called ammonia alerts, but just be aware that the little tab in the center does need to be replaced on a semi-regular basis. But the concept of these are great because if some emergency happened, then these colors would change, hopefully giving you an indication of its action time. I would highly recommend doing is labeling all of your power cords, because when we go to turn off pumps and so forth, if it's actually labeled, it makes our job heaps easier, especially in stressful circumstances where it needs to occur quickly. Wow, that filter, that heater looks very scary. Now it's really important to clean your heater on a semi-regular basis, because a heater in this condition is certainly a risk. Now it's important your lids are cleaned relatively regularly. Otherwise, as you can imagine, the light is trying to pump through all this green algae, which will discolor your water, reduce your light, and overall look terrible. So giving this a clean is a regular thing to do. Now this tank has some very amazingly shaped rocks, which if decorated correctly, could make this tank look really, really nice. Now, whenever you're removing rocks from the tank, particularly holy rocks like this, you need to watch out for fish falling out of the rocks, because it's really not hard for little fish or catfish to get stuck in one of these holes and you see them end up popping out. I've been very careful to try to make sure I don't take any fish out of the tank, but it's very easy to overlook a little fish or a little catfish hidden inside a hole. So even stop and listen, because you'll hear like a little flittering sound if there is one in there. So just be mindful not to get fish stuck in the rock. And if we left the rocks and plants sitting out here for a day or so, the algae will dry up in the sun. Then when you hit it with a hose, it'll literally just clean off. This rock is really not that bad, but I'll give it a hose and clean it up. But if this was allowed to be left in the sun for a day or so, then we flip it over, leave it in the sun for another day or so, then the rock will clean up really, really nicely. Absolutely not necessary, but... So now that I've removed the rocks from the aquarium, you can clearly see the sheer numbers of fish in this tank. There is a lot of fish in this tank. So removing some of the plainer colored ones is going to do this tank a real service, allowing us to replace the fish with a lot more colorful fish. But this job is much easier said than done, especially on these double-sided tanks. These fish are super smart and super able to avoid a fish net.